Okay.
I'll fire it up if you're ready.
One sec. Welcome back to Secret Sunshine, the podcast about the folks who make the most of living on the Sunshine Coast, and also the podcast about the folks who are doing the most they can to reestablish the Gibson Cinema as a place you love and want to come to. I'm your host and co-owner of the Gibson Cinema, Dominic Gerard, and I'm on a boat with my friend and partner, Ed Anderson. Hello, Ed.
Good morning.
This is your boat that belongs to Angler Management. That's your fishing charter company.
Yes, it is.
And I'm making you talk while you're doing work. Is that fun?
That is tons of fun.
We're on the boat because we're on a big adventure today. Are we not, Ed?
We are on a very big adventure, yes.
Without giving it away, because this is a secret mission, what can we say about what the plan is?
We are heading across the strait to Nanaimo Harbor this morning.
To investigate something?
To investigate something, yes. But we can't say what.
But we can't say what. You know, when you think about it, it kind of makes sense that when you're trying to reestablish a cinema on the Sunshine Coast, the work entails using a boat in some capacity. I mean, where else but on the coast would a movie theater need a bigger boat? Okay, so while Ed and I head out on our secret Nanaimo mission, this episode is going to stay home and try and solve a local mystery. See, for about as long as I've known the Gibson Cinema and attended the Gibson Cinema, I've heard rumors that the building was designed by one of the most celebrated Canadian architects of all time. That man is Arthur Erickson. I've heard with absolute certainty that he absolutely designed it, and I've heard with absolute certainty that he absolutely did not design it. These are conversations I've been hearing all the time. And now we're about to take over the cinema business. And although we don't own the actual building that the cinema is in, we absolutely want to know which of these rumors hold water. And thanks to the rich archive of the Sunshine Coast Museum, I found a few clues to help solve this mystery. For instance, there's an old sketch that shows a small, squat building with unusual extensions along the walls. If you look at the existing building today, you can still see those extensions on the back end of the building. There are photographs from 1963 or so of something called the Twilight Theater that matches that sketch. There are photos from a couple years later that show the construction of a big addition on the front side of the building. That's what you still see today. It's what stands today. It's what we now call the Gibson's Cinema, with the broken neon sign. What's really neat about that old photo is that it appears that the addition itself was built to wrap around the original front wall of the original building that looked like the original sketch in the archive. Basically, the lobby that you line up in for popcorn even today, it's the same lobby that dates back to 1963. Can I categorically say that it's an Arthur Erickson building? I feel close, but even with all that information, I still felt like I wasn't completely sure, so I called someone who could help.
Yes, hi. My name is Jeffrey Erickson. I'm Arthur Erickson's nephew, along with my brother, Christopher Erickson, and we have Studio Erickson now, where we do lots of interior design, architectural design, working on lots of my uncle's buildings and new projects of our own. And we were both mentored by Arthur and his interior designer, Francisco Crepaz.
Last month, Jeffrey noticed the Coast Reporter article talking about how we're set to take over the cinema at the end of April. And he noticed in that article the mention of the Erickson mystery.
I had heard about the theater in Gibson's, but it seemed like another one of what we get a lot of inquiries from people who think they have an Arthur Erickson, and it was actually designed by a member of his staff, or he had nothing to do with it even.
That does seem to be in line with the lore of Gibson's, right? This feels that like for as long as this building's been around, at least looking back on history today, there's always been a mystery of whether or not this is a building designed by a celebrated Canadian architect or just rumors or friend of a friend or, like you said, another studio mate. Before we dig into what we know and still may not know, I don't think everybody really knows why we're even talking about Arthur Erickson in the first place. What's a very brief sort of headline bio of who this man is?
Boy, it's hard to break it down because it's such an incredible life he had. During the Second World War, he was working with the British Secret Service and the Canadian Army as an interpreter because he spoke Japanese. He learned to speak Japanese, and his experience overseas was such that after the war, he came back and thought, I'd like to go into diplomatic service because he loved traveling. He extended his travels to places like Egypt and was really interested in travel. So he thought that's what he would do. And then he came home one day and there was this magazine. It had a feature on Frank Lloyd Wright. And he looked at it and he said, well, if an architect can do that, I'm going to be an architect. Just like that. It was so inspirational. And he ended up being asked by Frank Lloyd Wright to work for him before he graduated. But his prof said, Arthur, you've been selected as the top student, and you might want to consider the fact that you will be offered the traveling scholarship. And so with that, he thought, I'm going traveling. Forget about Frank Lloyd Wright. Sorry. And then later
Seems fair.
And then later he said he was glad that he didn't become one of the soldiers in the army for Frank Lloyd Wright. He never turned back after that, and he ended up graduating from McGill University in Montreal, and then came back to Vancouver and just started doing one house after another initially. And then, of course, the Simon Fraser University competition.
That's kind of one of the big footprints, right, that we still think about today.
It was the first one that really, because they won this, hands down, all of the jury gave it to Arthur Erickson and Jeffrey Massey, who worked with him on it. And after that, there was just one request after another. Next thing you know, he's on the cover of Time magazine, and not just for buildings, but for his lifestyle in terms of, he became one of the original, what they called jet setters. Always on a plane, always traveling to doing interesting work all over the world. And, it drew a lot of attention. And by Expo 67, he was the guy who conceived the Canadian Pavilion, the upside down pyramid, and then he did the Canadian Pavilion Expo 70, which won first prize, and then it just kept on like that. And then he was awarded the top architectural prize, the gold medal by the Architectural Institute of Architects. It just kept going.
Well, we're obviously Gibson's is on the Sunshine Coast, not far from Vancouver. To reorient and localize this a little bit, like a resident of this area, a resident in Vancouver, you mentioned Simon Fraser University, but what other buildings might readily come to people's mind and make them realize, oh, right, that is, or I didn't know that was an Erickson?
Right. Well, one of his most famous buildings is the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, on top of the cliff, and the law courts in Robson Square. They're not maintaining it properly, but it used to have fantastic waterfalls and lakes, and it was the idea of bringing nature into the city and turning a building on its side to put a park on top for the people rather than another vertical tower. Those are
quite an avant-garde decision or choice back in the day, right?
It really was, yeah. Because the previous government at the time had wanted the tallest building, period, in British Columbia.
And he said, let's go flat, basically.
Yeah, let's turn it on its side.
That's great.
And let people walk all over it.
Yeah.
And you see the Bank of Canada, well, that's one of his major projects.
Hmm.
The complete renovation and atrium addition of that. Buildings like Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto, the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. He probably received as much or more attention from his residential projects, though, and the whole West Coast modern movement from Vancouver down to California.
Hmm.
He was very instrumental in that.
So all of these big footprint Capitol buildings, big stamps on Canadian culture, on architectural history. And then here we are with this 132 seat Gibson Cinema that opened in 1963. Where could that even possibly fit into Erickson's thinking and life at that point in time, early 60s?
You know, he just liked working on a variety of projects, and he just liked helping people with their project, whatever it was. And so he would often take on houses that, would really he wouldn't make any money on in the end, but it was just a personal interest because that's where, for him, on that smaller scale, you could experiment and do things and take chances. Big projects, there's just so much involved, so many people, so much money that you have to be way more guarded in terms of what you do.
So, do you remember the sketch itself? Could you describe it? What you see looking at the sketch?
Yes, well, it describes a modernist building with an end. It doesn't really even look like a cinema as you would expect a cinema to look. And of course, that's not unlike my uncle. He was always rethinking archetypes. And so a cinema exterior wouldn't have to look like other cinemas.
Hmm.
Even how the signage is placed, the fact that there's a balcony on top where, helping to bring light into the space above and maybe filtering it into the lobby space below. He was always concerned about bringing light into spaces where people are converging.
Help me describe it. Like, what are these wings? Are these winglets? Like, how would you? The walls and the shape are quite unique and distinct, but I don't know what words I would use to.
Well, one word is rhythm. He liked to create a sense of rhythm to a building or a structure. And also, in terms of structures in the West Coast, you have to make a building strong.
Yeah.
Very often there's fins used for structural reasons.
Fins. That's the word I want to use. This
Yeah.
building is just made like it's like a radiator almost. It's just a series of fins all the way around the sides, right?
Yeah. Well, for structural reasons, it certainly helps a lot, but it also adds a rhythm to the design so that it's not just a box with a facade on the front.
When you see a sketch like that, given your connection, your literal family and professional connection, are able to go automatically, that's an Arthur sketch.
Absolutely.
How come?
I've just looked at so many of his sketches over the years, and everybody has a different way of drawing. And regarding the fins, I have to tell you, you should check out on our website the Dyed House, DYDE. It's fins all around. And maybe that's where it came from, because this Dyed House was 1960.
So Arthur was in his fin era, you could almost say.
Well, those two buildings, those are the only two where I've seen that expressed
Oh, wow.
so literally.
That's interesting. From what little research I've been successfully able to do, there's a note here that suggests that Arthur would have designed this little sketch, this simple sketch, for a family friend, someone named Norma Jackson.
Well, it was for a Jackson, we know that. That's exactly the way this thing would happen. He probably knew her somehow and met her on the ferry or something and did a little sketch right there.
But would it be common for your uncle to just do a solid for a friend because it's just fun or whatever? Like, is that part of his approach to thinking and creating?
Yes, he would do it out of generosity because he was not a businessman.
Oh, that's
Ended
interesting.
ended up being bankrupt in the long run because he wasn't thinking about the money. He was just thinking always about design solutions and
Yeah.
making things better.
Jeffrey, when you think about what you've learned about the history of the Gibson cinema here on the coast and the sketches you've seen and the photos you've seen, it sounds to me like you're reasonably confident that this building was, in fact, at least originally, its core, designed by your uncle.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So what does it feel like for you, the nephew who works to preserve and archive his legacy, to know that there's this tiny little theater in this tiny little town on the Sunshine Coast that only exists because your uncle decided to design it?
Oh, I think it's wonderful, and he would be delighted to know that. And, it's too bad that it's probably beyond that stage now, but it would be so nice if it could be restored.
Somewhere hiding in there is Arthur Erickson's legacy.
Based on some of those photographs I've seen, if you were to just strip it of the concrete block wall that went around it.
Like the front facade addition there.
Yeah, they closed all of the front end. So the original may all be there still, or for the most part.
As we zoom out, what do you think people should understand about the impact of your uncle's legacy on Canadian architecture?
One of the main things is the rethinking of stereotypes and what a place can be, not what it should look like or based on previous assumptions, just making people see things differently and really make people dream big too. And, Expo 67 was like that. It was like a utopian ideal of what could be. And it was really a magical place in so many ways. They weren't just trying to imitate stuff that had gone before or build just for the sake of making profit. He felt that there was a greater responsibility for architects to go beyond just thinking about day-to-day concerns.
I like what you said about encouraging people to open up their minds and dream a little bit. I mean, I have skin in the game here, but that's also a really nice way to describe going to a movie.
Yeah. And he loved movies, and he loved going to the opera and the ballet and everything else.
This is probably a silly question, but what kind of movies do you think Arthur liked?
I can't really comment on what would be Arthur's favorite films or anything, but he went to a lot of movies, and he inspired actors too. I mean, Shirley MacLaine, and she was a very good friend of Arthur's. And whenever she was in Vancouver, she would always meet up with him.
So he has a literal connection to Hollywood then.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. And people like Warhol, Andy Warhol, I mean, he would always look up Arthur when he was here and asked him to do a house for him. Fashion designers and people in film, and the list is very long.
So there it is. I feel like I can say that this mystery has been solved. Jeffrey Erickson, nephew of Arthur Erickson, says that yes, the building we call the Gibson Cinema, at the very least, the building within the building, is in fact an Arthur Erickson design. And just to add to that, after I recorded that interview, I popped by the Sunshine Coast Museum and had a chat with the staff there. And Ali shared a newspaper clipping from July 18, 1963. It's a clipping that I had missed in my own research, and it says, quote, "The theater was designed by award-winning architect A. Erickson of Vancouver." I think we can all guess what the A stands for, and I think we can all agree that it took a long time for me to find that sentence and share it with you. Anyway, the Nanaimo secret mission was successful. You'll hear more about that later. Thanks to Jeffrey Erickson of Studio Erickson for sharing his time and his knowledge. Thanks to Ali Rose Bartlett and the team at Sunshine Coast Museum and Archives for their help. And thanks to Max Henry for the show's original music. We're a couple more weeks away now from us taking over the cinema, from us rolling up our sleeves and starting a new chapter for an old theater. there's guys, there's a ton to do and there's a ton to talk about. We're still excited. I hope you're still excited too. I'm Dominic Gerard. Lots more to come.